The gentle rhythm of ocean waves against the shore had always stirred something deep within Reed. As a boy growing up in the quiet countryside of Indiana, he had dreamed of adventure far beyond the endless rows of cornfields. The sea, though distant, called to him through books and old tales passed down by his grandfather, a veteran of the Great War. While his parents wished for him to settle into a predictable life, Reed yearned for something greater, a purpose that could only be found beyond the familiar. Before Reed even opened his eyes, a grin spread across his face. His first thought of the day filled him with quiet joy, and the soft snoring beside him made him chuckle. He had never heard a woman snore before. Breathing in deeply, he caught the lingering scent of her perfume. Opening his eyes, he stared at the ceiling before looking down. The warmth against him was real. He was in her apartment, and the beautiful woman lying next to him was no dream. It was almost unbelievable. He had always been shy around women, not unattractive or unintelligent, just lacking the confidence to make a move. Last night had changed everything. He tilted his head slightly, brushing his chin against her silky black hair. Leilani slept with her head nestled into his shoulder, an arm draped over his chest. Careful not to wake her, he placed a gentle kiss on her forehead and closed his eyes again, reflecting on how much had changed since joining the Navy. Against his parents' wishes, he had enlisted right after high school. They had always treated him like a boy, but he was determined to become a man. The sea had always drawn him in, making the Navy an obvious choice. His persistence had paid off. He had excelled in training and earned a place aboard the USS California as a seaman first class. Growing up in a small Indiana town, he had never imagined seeing so much of the world. His ship had taken him to ports along the West Coast and across the South Pacific, but nowhere compared to this. Pearl Harbor had recently become a permanent base, and to Reed, Hawaii felt like paradise. Returning to Indiana after experiencing this place seemed impossible. As Leilani stirred beside him, a sleepy smile crossed her face. She was even more stunning in the morning light, and Reed still struggled to believe he was here, with her. They lay in each other's arms for a while before she finally asked when he needed to return to the ship. He had the entire weekend, which meant they had all day together. Leilani, who knew the island better than anyone, took him on an unforgettable tour. They wandered through lush hills, along the coast, and into hidden corners few outsiders ever saw. As they spent more time together, Reed admired her effortless joy, the way she embraced every moment with gratitude. She, in turn, was drawn to his quiet charm. Beneath his initial shyness, she found a warmth and sincerity unlike any sailor she had met before. By evening, they were both tired but content. She shared stories of her love for photography, her collection of albums documenting the island's beauty and the uncertainty of the future. Life could take her anywhere, she said, and she wanted to capture every moment while she could. They found a small diner for dinner, and as they ate, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't want this night to end. He had never met anyone like her, never felt this way about anyone before. He wondered if this was what love felt like. The way his pulse quickened when she smiled, how her laughter felt like music, how he couldn't picture life without her. As the meal ended, Leilani surprised him with an invitation to spend the night again. This weekend, which already felt like a dream, was about to continue. There was only one condition. If he stayed, he had to accompany her to church in the morning, where her parents would undoubtedly ask about his intentions. She teased that he could ignore them, but Reed wasn't sure he wanted to. They called a taxi back to her apartment, and once inside, she playfully asked for his shirt, insisting it needed a rinse. While she set it aside to dry, she ran a warm bath, adding a few drops of vanilla oil. There wasn't enough room for both of them, but she had a suggestion. He could help soap her back, and she'd return the favor. Reed had never seen anything more breathtaking than the way she moved, effortless and unself-conscious. As she sank into the warm water, he realized something. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. This was something deeper. This was paradise. Reed knelt beside the bathtub, running a soapy washcloth over Leilani's skin as she leaned back with a contented sigh. When he finished, she returned the favor, her hands gliding over his body with slow, deliberate care. They dried each other off afterward, warmth lingering between them even after the bath was over. Leilani wrapped herself in a towel, securing it above her chest, before checking Reed's shirt to see if it had dried. They decided to head out for dinner, choosing to walk rather than drive. The evening air was too perfect to rush through. As they reached the end of her street, they paused to take in the sunset, the sky melting into deep hues of orange and purple over the Pacific. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her waist, both of them soaking in the quiet moment. It hadn't even been a full day since they met, yet something between them already felt deep and unshakable. At the USO, a live band played swing music. Reed wasn't much of a dancer, but Leilani eagerly guided him through a few jitterbug steps. It took some time, but he eventually caught on. When the tempo slowed, he pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. Eyes closed, they moved together, lost in the music and in each other. They had been dancing for about an hour when they took a break, sitting at a small table to rest. Reed excused himself for a moment, but as he returned, he spotted two men in army uniforms leaning over Leilani. At first, he assumed she knew them, but her tense expression made it clear she didn't welcome their company. Without hesitation, he walked over, resting a protective hand on her shoulder, as he politely but firmly made it known that she was with him. The soldiers didn't take the hint. One, taller and cockier than the other, smirked before telling Reed to leave, that a girl like her was out of his league. They were older, bigger, and likely more experienced in fights. But Reed wasn't about to back down. Before he could respond, a familiar voice called out from behind him. Two of his shipmates had spotted the situation and stepped in without hesitation. The soldiers hesitated, reassessing the odds. After a brief exchange, they muttered something dismissive and walked away, leaving Reed standing victorious. Relief washed over him, though he kept his composure, thanking his friends before introducing them to Leilani. They talked for a bit before parting ways. For the rest of the night, Leilani looked at Reed with something new in her eyes: admiration, pride. He had stood his ground for her, unshaken. To her, he wasn't just some sailor. He was her protector, and later that night she made sure he knew just how much she appreciated him. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Reed lay awake, his mind racing. The feelings he had for Leilani were unlike anything he had ever experienced. He knew he loved her, but what could he do about it? His service wasn't over, and he had no idea where life would take him. And more than anything, he wondered, did she love him the same way? Leilani stirred beside him, stretching before curling closer, her head resting on his chest. Without opening her eyes, she murmured a sleepy greeting before realizing the time. It was already past 6:30. They had to get ready for church. She asked if he still planned to come with her, and he reassured her that he wouldn't miss the chance to meet her parents. She smiled, pleased with his answer, then teasingly suggested they return after the service and spend the rest of the day in bed. Reed grinned at the idea, but for now, they had somewhere to be. The walk to church was easy, the morning quiet and peaceful. They joked about Reed's upcoming introduction to her family, neither realizing that this Sunday would be unlike any other. As they approached the church, the pastor stood at the entrance, welcoming the congregation. Leilani searched for her parents, but assumed they had already gone inside. She took Reed's hand as they stepped forward, but then something strange caught his attention, a distant, growing hum. At first, it blended into the usual sounds of the island, but it grew louder, more distinct. Planes. Lots of them. Reed glanced up, scanning the sky. A dark formation moved in from the north. His pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. Leilani followed his gaze, asking what was wrong. He wasn't sure yet, but a deep sense of dread was creeping in. He knew a few B-17s were expected that morning, but this wasn't a handful of planes. It was a swarm, and they weren't coming from the right direction. The low murmur of the crowd shifted as more people noticed the approaching aircraft. Shadows stretched over the streets as the formation moved in. Then Reed saw it, round insignias on the wings, bombs hanging beneath them. His stomach dropped. Japanese Zeros. Panic surged through him as he shouted the warning. The island wasn't just seeing a flyover. They were under attack. Explosions sounded in the distance, the first bombs hitting their targets. Thick black smoke rose from the harbor, and the ground shook beneath them. Leilani clung to him, terrified. He held her close, knowing this could be the last time. He whispered that he loved her, and she choked out the same words in return, sobbing against his chest. She wanted to run to the church, believing it would be safe, but Reed knew he couldn't stay. His ship was under fire. People needed him. She begged him not to go, to stay where it was safe, but safety was no longer an option. More bombs fell, the sky filled with chaos. Reed pulled her into one last desperate kiss before stepping back. He had to go. Leilani refused to let him leave, clinging to him with everything she had, but there was no time. Tears streamed down her face as he broke away. Then, as the world around them erupted into war, he ran. Leilani dropped to her knees, clutching Reed's legs in a desperate attempt to stop him. Before he could react, the pastor arrived, a steady presence amid the chaos. He gently pulled her to her feet, urging her to be strong. The world was changing, and they would all have to face it with courage. Reed watched as she disappeared into the church, her tear-streaked face the last thing he saw before sprinting away. Planes roared overhead as he cut through alleyways, taking the fastest route to the harbor. When he reached Battleship Row, it was hell on earth. Thick smoke blackened the sky, fires raged across the decks, and explosions shattered the morning air. The acrid scent of burning oil filled his lungs. On the shore, fishermen abandoned their boats in terror. Reed wasted no time. He jumped into one and gunned the engine toward his ship. As he neared, the silhouettes of men struggling against the onslaught became clearer. But before he could reach them, a Japanese Zero spotted him. The plane dived, tools blazing. Bullets shredded the boat, forcing Reed to dive into the water. He swam hard, dodging the deadly hail of fire, pushing toward his sinking vessel. A ladder was lowered just in time. Gasping for breath, he hauled himself onto the deck. The California was already listing. She had taken a hit. Around him, his shipmates scrambled to fight back. Reed grabbed an anti-aircraft tool, took aim, and fired. A Zero spiraled into the ocean. Chaos reigned. Ammunition was running low, and the power was out. Men formed a chain, passing rounds up by hand, but it wasn't fast enough. Reed fired in short, precise bursts, conserving what little he had. He took down another enemy plane, then another. Just as he locked onto a sixth, everything went black. At New Hope Church, the congregation huddled together in fear. The walls trembled with each explosion. Leilani sobbed into her hands, inconsolable. Her father assured her they would be safe, that the enemy wouldn't bomb civilians. But she wasn't afraid for herself. Reed had gone back to his ship. She barely knew his last name. He barely knew hers. It hadn't mattered before, but now it meant everything. If he didn't return, how would they ever find each other again? Her heart ached with the devastating truth. She might never see him again. A ringing in his ears was the first thing Reed noticed when he woke. The bright hospital lights burned his eyes, and every inch of his body throbbed with pain. A nurse spoke, but her voice barely broke through the noise in his head. He struggled to sit up, ignoring the searing pain. His ship, what had happened? Were they at war? The nurse confirmed his worst fear. The battleships were gone. The attack had left thousands dead. Yesterday, President Roosevelt had declared war. Yesterday? It was Tuesday. He had been unconscious for 2 days. Panic rushed through him. Leilani, was she safe? Had the church been hit? The nurse hesitated. There had been civilian casualties, but no churches had been bombed. He tried to get up, but his body collapsed under the weight of his injuries. A doctor rushed in, scolding him. His body had been wrecked by the blast and the fall into the water. The swelling in his spine was severe. Moving would only make it worse. Reed barely heard him. He didn't care about himself. He needed to find Leilani. But there was nothing he could do now. Lying back, he clenched his fists. The war had only just begun, and he already felt like he had lost everything. The only thing left was hope. Reed lay in his hospital bed, eyes closed, when the sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. They were too heavy to belong to a nurse. He opened his eyes to see Captain Bunkley, his commanding officer, standing at his bedside. The man looked older, worn down by the attack. Reed struggled to salute, but the captain waved it off. Without preamble, Bunkley informed him of his promotion. He was now Petty Officer First Class. He had also been nominated for a Valor Award, 5 enemy planes down, countless lives saved. But Reed couldn't celebrate. The ship was gone, sitting at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Nearly 100 shipmates were dead, 60 more wounded. The captain encouraged him to focus on recovery. He would be reassigned to an aircraft carrier as soon as he was fit for duty, then eventually to a new battleship. Before Bunkley left, Reed made a request. He needed to know if Leilani was safe. He didn't have her last name or address, only that she attended New Hope Church. The captain promised to check civilian casualty records and, if possible, visit the church. By Tuesday, Reed was back on his feet, pushing through the pain. He was eager to leave the hospital, but still haunted by the uncertainty of Leilani's fate. On Thursday, Bunkley returned with news. He hadn't found the pastor, but a neighbor saw people leaving the church safely after the attack. Leilani's name wasn't on any casualty lists. It wasn't definitive, but it was something. Relief flooded Reed. Then the captain got to official business. Standing at attention, Reed received the Medal of Honor for his bravery that day. His nurses and doctors gathered to watch, their smiles proud. The honor felt heavy in his hands, but all he could think about was the war ahead. Along with his medal came new orders. He was being transferred to the USS Hornet. There was no time to search for Leilani. The war was moving forward, and so was he. Over the next few months, Reed found himself in the thick of battle. First, the Hornet launched the Doolittle raid on Japan, then came Midway. When the ship was eventually lost in combat, he was reassigned to the USS Tennessee, a battleship salvaged and returned to service. For 3 long years, he fought across the Pacific, from Iwo Jima to Okinawa. Promotions came, along with more medals, but none of it mattered as much as the day he heard the news. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. His only thought was getting back to Pearl Harbor. But when he rushed to request leave, his heart sank. The Tennessee was headed to Philadelphia, not Hawaii. His captain was sympathetic but firm. Reed was still under orders. He had to go home with his ship. That night, he lay awake in his bunk, frustration burning in his chest. He had waited years for this moment, imagined it in 100 different ways. Now, it felt further away than ever. Somehow, he had to find a way back. He had to find her. The USS Tennessee arrived at the Philadelphia Navy Yard on December 7, 1945. The docks were filled with families and loved ones, embracing the returning sailors. Reed watched the tearful reunions, happy for his shipmates but unable to ignore the ache in his own heart. He had no one waiting for him. His only thought was getting to Pearl Harbor, finding Leilani, and keeping the promise he had made to himself. First, he needed to call home. His parents deserved to hear from him after years of war and distance. He had written about Leilani in his letters, and he was sure they would understand his need to find her. It took hours to find an available payphone, but when his mother finally answered, her excitement was overwhelming. Before he could say much, he heard another voice in the background. A woman. His mother hesitated before explaining. It was Carol Johnson, an old friend from high school. She had been helping around the house. Reed felt something was off. His mother's voice wavered, and then she broke the news. His father was dying. Lung cancer. He hadn't worked in months, confined to bed, growing weaker by the day. The search for Leilani would have to wait. With emergency leave granted, Reed took the first train home. The military covered the fare for returning soldiers. Less than 2 days later, he stepped through the front door of the house he had grown up in. Before he could set down his bag, Carol was in his arms, kissing him. He froze, too stunned to react. When she pulled away, she apologized, saying she was just happy to see him. His mother, watching with a knowing smile, welcomed him home. He barely had time for pleasantries. His father was upstairs, waiting. Before heading up, his mother warned him. His father was not the man he remembered. Reed prepared himself, but nothing could have softened the blow. The man who had once been so strong, who had worked in a steel mill his whole life, was now frail and unrecognizable. His once powerful arms were thin and weak, his face gaunt, eyes sunken. Even knowing what to expect, it was hard to hide his shock. Still, he forced a smile. His father, though weak, was relieved to see him. They spoke quietly, his father reflecting on the many who never made it home. When Reed reassured him that he was safe now, his father simply chuckled, making a joke about his own fate being sealed. They talked until exhaustion overtook him. Before leaving, Reed kissed his father's cheek, promising to see him again soon. Downstairs, his mother and Carol were making sandwiches. Reed took the moment to speak to his mother privately. There was no hope for treatment. His father had ignored the symptoms too long, dismissing them until it was too late. The cancer had spread. Reed's heart ached. He wished he had known sooner, but his mother explained they hadn't wanted to burden him while he was fighting a war. Carol took a tray upstairs, giving them a moment alone. His mother brought up his future, asking if he planned to stay. He told her the truth. He needed to get to Hawaii, to find Leilani. He loved her and intended to marry her. She didn't understand. He didn't even know if she was still there, had no last name, no way to find her. She pleaded with him to stay, reminding him that his father had little time left. Faced with the reality of losing his father, Reed knew she was right. He couldn't leave, not now. He promised to stay, at least for now. 30 days of family leave. By then, his discharge papers should be ready. After that, he would find a job. But in the back of his mind, he knew once his duty here was done, he would go to Pearl Harbor. No matter how impossible it seemed, he had to find Leilani. Reed's mother knew he longed to leave for Hawaii, but their family needed him. His father's illness had drained their savings, and without an income, they had little to survive on. Hoping to change his mind, she brought up Carol. She revealed that Carol had been deeply invested in his well-being, attending church to pray for his safety and eagerly listening to every letter he sent home. She had even cried when she learned about Leilani. Before Reed could respond, Carol entered the kitchen. She had just finished feeding his father, who had been in better spirits since Reed's return, but had gone to rest. When she mentioned sleeping on the couch, Reed insisted she keep his old room, saying he would take the couch instead. Wanting more privacy, he asked about the basement. His mother admitted she hadn't been down there in a while, but his father had left it cluttered with old plans and supplies. Carol eagerly volunteered to help him clean it out. Reed later called Captain Cope, requesting his discharge papers as soon as possible. The captain assured him he'd expedite the process and wished him luck, acknowledging that the war had left many men feeling lost, now that the fight was over. That evening, Reed sat alone in his father's chair, sipping a beer, lost in thought. Memories of war haunted him. The friends he had lost, the ones buried at sea, the randomness of survival. The weight of it all settled in his chest. Carol watched him from the kitchen, sensing his grief. Without a word, she walked over, sat on his lap, and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. She assured him that if he ever needed anything, she was there for him. Reed, though surprised, didn't pull away. People changed, he thought. Whatever happened in the past didn't seem to matter anymore. He thanked her and joked about how she might regret offering to help with the basement, knowing it would be a mess. She laughed and suggested they start right away. They found the basement cluttered but manageable. His father had once planned to add an extra bedroom, and the unused materials were still there. Reed saw an opportunity. With the electrical and heating already in place, he could easily convert a corner into a private space. His mother had no objections. Over the next few days, Reed and Carol worked side by side. She wasn't much of a carpenter, but she was eager to help. He wired the space for lighting and outlets while she helped clear boxes. Together, they found a used dresser and bed frame. Carol suggested getting a double bed, but Reed, used to tight ship bunks, insisted a single was enough. By the time they finished, the basement was transformed into a comfortable retreat. Reed enjoyed the privacy, while Carol saw it as an opportunity. She wanted to make him forget about Leilani. In the months she had spent with his parents, she had grown fond of him. He was everything she wanted in a husband, strong, reliable, and unlike the men who wasted their wages at the local bars. Now, with so many young men lost to war, good bachelors were rare. She wasn't going to let Reed slip away. 2 weeks later, Reed received his discharge papers, but by then his father's condition had worsened. He set aside all thoughts of work or leaving for Hawaii, dedicating his time to being by his father's side. One early morning, his mother woke him, her voice shaking. His father was struggling to breathe. Reed hurried upstairs, knowing what was coming. His father was too weak to speak, but gave a small shake of his head when Reed asked if he wanted to go to the hospital. He had accepted his fate. He wanted to die at home. Reed's mother had been holding back tears for days, but as she gripped her husband's frail hand, she couldn't anymore. She knew this moment was coming, but no amount of preparation could ease the pain. She turned to Reed, voice shaking, and told him to get Carol. She would want to be there. Rushing down the hall, he woke Carol. Dazed and groggy, she quickly understood. Throwing on her robe, she followed him back to the bedroom. His mother lay beside her husband, whispering words of love and gratitude for their years together. Reed joined her, telling his father how much he loved him. In a quiet moment, his mother reminisced about his awkward, nervous proposal, teasing him about dropping the ring. A small, tired smile spread across his father's face. She squeezed his hand, promising they would be together again one day. His smile lingered as he took his last breath. The room was silent except for quiet sobs. It was nearly an hour before anyone could speak. Carol, despite knowing him for less than a year, had grown to love him like the father she never had. She was the first to pull herself together, heading downstairs to make coffee. Reed stayed a little longer, before gently covering his father with a sheet, an action that always felt so final. He wanted to spare his mother from having to do it. The funeral was larger than expected. Over 200 people, many from the steel mills, came to pay their respects. His father had left an impact on more lives than Reed had ever realized. Afterward, his mother broke down. She had held herself together during the service, but once home, the weight of it crushed her. Reed and Carol sat with her late into the night, offering what little comfort they could. Around 1 a.m, Carol hesitated before making a request. She asked if she could sleep beside him just for the night, not for anything more, just to be held. She didn't want to be alone, and she thought his mother would prefer to grieve privately. Reed hesitated. It had been years since a woman had been in his bed, since Leilani. Guilt twisted inside him, but so did doubt. Would he ever see her again? Seeing the sincerity in Carol's eyes, he finally nodded. She promised to wear something, and they left it at that. She had no intention of rushing him. She knew he loved someone else, but she also knew time and his mother's encouragement were on her side. A few days later, Reed decided it was time to find work. His mother seemed stable enough, and the bills weren't going to pay themselves. He drove to Inland Steel, the massive complex his father had worked at for years. The sight of the smokestacks brought back memories, standing outside with his father as a child, hearing him talk about the importance of steel, and laughing to himself because he never wanted to end up there. Yet here he was. The employment office was already packed when he arrived. After hours of waiting, he was finally called in for an interview. The man across the desk had been at his father's funeral and expressed his condolences before getting to business. Reed had left the military section of his application blank, but the interviewer knew who he was, a war hero, a chief petty officer. That kind of leadership didn't go unnoticed. Instead of a labor job, he was offered something in management. With a recommendation, he wouldn't be anywhere near the blast furnaces. The interview ended with a promise. He would likely have a job by the following week. Driving home, Reed felt torn. He needed the job, but it felt like another step toward a life he had never wanted. Office work or not, he was becoming what he had always feared, just another steelworker from Northwest Indiana. And with every passing day, his dream of returning to Leilani felt more impossible. His mother was thrilled when he told her. Carol, confident in his success, had already gone out to buy ingredients for a celebratory dinner. One question had been sitting in the back of Reed's mind since he came home. Now felt like the time to ask. "Mom, why is Carol living here? What happened to her family?" His mother sighed. Carol's father had always been a heavy drinker, but when her mother finally had enough and left, it only got worse. One day, Reed's father had found Carol crying alone in the park. Recognizing her, he brought her home, and she never looked back. She had no idea where her parents were now. "She's part of this family, Reed," his mother said softly. "She's been a blessing, especially when your father got sick. She'll make a wonderful wife for some lucky man." Reed caught the not-so-subtle look she gave him, but didn't argue. "I'm not looking for a wife, Mom," he said, "and I already know the woman I'm going to marry." She said nothing, but they both knew the truth. His chances of finding Leilani were slim. Months passed, and life settled into a routine. Reed took a job as the plant's security chief, managing schedules and overseeing operations. It wasn't the factory floor, and the pay was good. His mother slowly found her way through grief, and Carol kept the household running smoothly. Reed found himself adjusting, though not without difficulty. The idea of Carol washing his laundry had initially made him uncomfortable, but over time, he accepted it. That winter, Reed surprised his mother and Carol with something they had never seen before, a television. He invited a technician over to set it up, then watched as they marveled at the tiny glowing screen. His mother gasped. How did he get in there?" Carol, more aware of modern technology, laughed. "Oh, Reed, is this really one of those TV things?" Pleased with himself, he demonstrated how to change channels. His mother, still mystified, whispered, "It's magic." Word spread quickly, and within days, neighbors crowded their home to witness the miracle of television. Reed watched them with a quiet smile, knowing that while life wasn't what he had envisioned, it was still moving forward, even if his heart was still stuck in the past. Reed arrived home to the smell of dinner cooking and the sight of Carol sitting on the couch, laughing with a man he didn't recognize. The guy was about their age, well-dressed, and confident. As Reed watched him place a hand on Carol's knee, a surge of unexpected jealousy hit him. Clearing his throat, he made his presence known. Carol quickly stood, surprised to see him home already. She introduced the man as Brad Wilson, a neighbor's nephew. Brad shook Reed's hand before making his exit, leaving Carol with a thoughtful expression. Reed, still unsettled, asked his mother about Brad. She assured him he was harmless, but pointed out that Carol hadn't dated since moving in. Maybe it was time she did. The thought didn't sit well with Reed, though he wasn't sure why. Was he starting to have feelings for her? Wanting to shake off the unease, he suggested they all go out one evening. His mother declined, but encouraged him to take Carol on a proper date. Moments later, Carol walked in, excited at the idea. A few nights later, he took them to dinner and a show. At the theater's concession stand, they ran into an old classmate, Steve, who seemed interested in Carol. When he asked for her number, she deflected, saying she'd call him instead. Seeing his mother hand Steve a pen made Reed feel oddly betrayed. He barely registered the movie. His mind was too focused on Carol. He had grown used to having her around, and the thought of losing that unsettled him. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe he should see if there was something between them. When he mentioned it to his mother later, she was thrilled. Carol had been a blessing, and she was certain they would be good together. With her encouragement, Reed planned a real date, dinner and dancing at a club called Plato's Place. Carol eagerly agreed. That night, Reed noticed that the club had far more men than women, and given Carol's popularity in town, he worried he'd spend the evening watching her dance with others. But his concerns faded quickly. Though many men asked, she politely turned them down, saying she was only dancing with Reed. By the time they returned home, they were both relaxed, the evening having been filled with laughter, dancing, and just enough alcohol to dull inhibitions. As soon as they stepped inside, Carol turned, pulled him close, and kissed him. Reed wasn't surprised. In fact, he had been about to do the same. After a long, lingering kiss, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "Do you like me?" "Of course I do," he answered. "Then show me," she murmured. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was her teasing all night, or maybe he did have feelings for her after all. Whatever the reason, he pulled her back into his arms, and that night, she made sure he never thought of Leilani again. 6 months later, Carol wore an engagement ring. 4 months after that, they stood before a priest, exchanging vows. Carol hadn't invited her father. She barely considered him family anymore. Instead, Reed's best friend from the factory walked her down the aisle and served as best man. The reception took place in their backyard, decorated with paper garlands and lanterns Carol had picked up from a thrift store. Reed had even gone the extra mile, spraying the yard for mosquitoes days in advance. Wanting the women to enjoy the day, he hired a local restaurant to cater the event. His mother, watching her son marry, felt joy, but also sorrow. She excused herself from the party, retreating to her room before the emotions overwhelmed her. Reed noticed her absence and followed. Sitting beside her on the bed, he took her hand. "It's because of Dad, isn't it?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "He would be so proud of you today. I just wish he was here." Reed smiled softly. "I have a feeling he is. He's probably watching, shaking his head, wondering why you're crying when he's right here in your heart." She laughed through her tears, knowing he was right. Taking a deep breath, she wiped her eyes, kissed a framed photo of her late husband, and whispered, "I love you." Then, with a brave smile, she returned to the celebration. Their honeymoon was short, but memorable. Reed had arranged for the neighbors to check on his mother, while he and Carol spent 5 days in Wisconsin Dells. By day, they explored news sites and watched live shows. By night, Carol made sure Reed knew exactly what she liked in bed. For 2 years, Reed and Carol settled into a comfortable life. Mary insisted they take the master bedroom, while she moved into the smaller one, and they made sure she had everything she needed. Reed thrived at Inland Steel, earning a promotion he hadn't even sought. They made friends, mostly other married couples, and often socialized. Despite his seemingly perfect life, Reed occasionally found himself thinking about Leilani, wondering where she was and if she had moved on. He told himself she probably had. Carol, on the other hand, had everything she had ever wanted: a stable husband, a secure home, and a mother figure in Mary. She had built a social life with the wives of Reed's co-workers and enjoyed the comfort of knowing their house was already paid off. But something felt off. Reed was a caring and attentive husband, but no matter how much she tried, he never embraced the rougher passion she sometimes craved. She found herself thinking about the men she had dated before, ones who had been wilder, more aggressive, and full of energy. She missed that excitement. She wasn't actively looking to cheat, but if the opportunity presented itself in a way that felt safe, she knew she wouldn't resist. 4 years into their marriage, Reed's best friend, Tom, invited him for a quick beer after work. At a small diner near the plant, Tom hesitated before finally confessing that he had seen Carol in a compromising situation. She had driven to the grocery store, but never went inside. Instead, she got into another man's car, kissed him, and drove off. Tom, suspicious, followed them to a motel, where he watched Carol meet the man at the door of a room before they went inside together. Reed felt a wave of disbelief and anger. He had never questioned Carol's loyalty before. Thanking Tom for telling him, he promised to ask her directly. When he got home, Carol was in the basement doing laundry. He asked his mother about Carol's shopping trips, trying to piece together how much time she usually spent out. Mary, unaware of what he had learned, insisted that Carol never spent too much time away unless she was visiting friends. When Reed finally told her what Tom had seen, she was in shock, refusing to believe it. Carol came upstairs, cheerful as always, until she noticed the tension in the room. Reed wasted no time and confronted her. She froze, caught off guard. For months, she had been careful, certain that no one had noticed her meetings with Arnie Becker. Desperate to cover her tracks, she insisted that the man was just an old friend in town for a short visit, and that she had only gone to his motel to catch up. She claimed the kiss was meaningless, just a friendly greeting. Reed, unconvinced, pressed for details. When asked for the man's name, Carol hesitated before blurting out something that didn't add up. Reed knew she was lying, but without solid proof, he had nothing to go on. He made it clear that he wouldn't tolerate betrayal, and warned her that if he found out she was seeing other men, their marriage would be over. That night, Carol tried to reassure him, but he remained distant. She attempted to get close, but he turned away. Lying awake, she realized how close she had come to losing everything. From now on, she would have to be much more careful. The next morning, Reed took his father's car keys from Carol's purse before heading to work. On the way, he formulated a plan. He couldn't confront her without proof, but he could at least confirm whether she had lied. At lunchtime, he left work early and drove straight to the Cherry Lane Motel. Approaching the receptionist, he asked about a guest named Adam Jones. The man checked the registry but found no one by that name. When Reed asked about room 110, the receptionist refused to disclose information until Reed slipped him some cash. After a quick glance around, the man finally answered. "Arnold Becker." Reed's fists clenched. He asked if Becker had stayed there before. The receptionist nodded, explaining that he was a regular, visiting with the same woman 2 or 3 times a month for nearly half a year. When Reed showed him a few photos, the man didn't hesitate. He pointed straight at Carol. Reed's stomach twisted. He thanked the man and turned to leave. The receptionist, hesitant, asked if she was his wife. Reed muttered, "For now," before walking out. Too furious to return to work, Reed stopped at a diner, ordered a coffee, and called his boss, requesting the rest of the day off. His mind swirled with anger, betrayal, and disbelief. By the time he got home, he was seething. Carol was in the basement doing laundry. Trying to stay calm, Reed asked his mother about Carol's shopping trips. Mary, oblivious, assured him that Carol never stayed out too long unless visiting friends. When he finally told her the truth, that Tom had seen Carol enter a motel with another man, Mary refused to believe it. She insisted there must be an explanation. Moments later, Carol came upstairs, cheerful as always, until she noticed their tense expressions. Before she could ask what was wrong, Reed confronted her. He told her he knew about the motel, about Arnold Becker, about how long it had been going on. Carol turned pale. Caught completely off guard, she scrambled for an excuse, but Reed wasn't interested in lies. His voice rose as he demanded to know how many others there had been. He threw her betrayal in her face, even mocking the receptionist's comment about how beautiful she was, suggesting she keep him in mind for her next affair. Mary, overhearing, entered the room just as Carol broke down in tears. Confused and heartbroken, she turned to her son for answers. When Reed told her the truth, she was devastated. Carol had been like family. She had been the daughter she never had, someone she had trusted with her home and her son. Carol sobbed, unable to say anything. The damage was done. After a long silence, she realized Reed and Mary had left the room. She heard voices from the living room and cautiously followed. What she saw broke her. Mary, weeping in Reed's arms, while he struggled to hold back his own tears. When he finally looked at her, his expression was one of pure contempt. Before she could say anything, she ran to their bedroom, slamming the door behind her. At some point, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into uneasy sleep, only to wake to a cold voice beside her. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, her expression unreadable. She demanded an explanation. Why? After everything they had done for her, after treating her like family, why would she betray them? Carol, ashamed and defeated, admitted the truth. She had everything she wanted when she married Reed, but over time she took it for granted. She missed the excitement of her past, the thrill of recklessness. When she reconnected with Arnie Becker, it started as something harmless. She convinced herself it would only happen once. Then it happened again, and again. Soon, it became routine. And now, it had destroyed everything. Mary listened in silence. Then, with quiet certainty, she told Carol that Reed would divorce her, and she wouldn't try to stop him. Carol accepted her fate. She had no defense. Mary, still disappointed but unable to fully turn her back, offered her $200, the money she had set aside for their anniversary gift. Carol refused at first but broke down sobbing as she took it, overwhelmed by the kindness she no longer deserved. Before leaving the room, Mary turned back. Carol, realizing something, asked where Reed was. Mary glanced at the clock. It was after 6. He'd gone to pick up a pizza for dinner. Carol wiped her face, trying to steady her breathing. He would be back any minute. The morning after Carol left, Reed arranged time off from work, explaining his family situation to his boss, who granted him a week off and even let him leave early that day. By then, Carol had taken Mary's money and walked the long miles back to her childhood home, unsure if her father would let her in. Arriving at the house, she found the door unlocked. Inside, it was a disaster. Empty liquor bottles littered the floor, dishes overflowed in the sink, and the air was thick with the stench of alcohol and neglect. Everything was the same, just dirtier and more decayed, frozen in time. Her old bedroom, untouched except for dust, suggested her father still lived there, though he was nowhere to be seen. Hoping to prove her usefulness before he returned, Carol decided to clean. She bought supplies from the same corner store she had visited as a child and spent the day scrubbing, airing out rooms, and washing laundry. Meanwhile, Reed used his unexpected free time to find a divorce lawyer, choosing one with the largest ad in the phone book. He scheduled a meeting for later that day. By the time he returned home, it was past 4. Mary greeted him as he walked in, and he immediately asked about Carol. She explained that Carol had assumed she'd be thrown out and had gone to stay with her father. When Reed realized she had left Mary alone all day, frustration flared, but his mother quickly shut him down. She reminded him that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself, just as she had for years. She also warned him that Carol had nothing, no home, no money, no job, and had dedicated herself to caring for Mary and the house. Reed assured her that he intended to be fair, explaining that his lawyer had suggested he pay Carol a portion of his income for a few years, a sum higher than what she would earn as a housekeeper. Mary agreed it was fair. By evening, Carol had nearly restored the house to a livable state, scrubbing the floors, washing clothes, vacuuming, and even preparing dinner in hopes of softening her father's heart. But as she sat alone at the kitchen table eating, the reality of why she had left in the first place sank in. Her father was likely at a bar, drinking himself into oblivion. By 11, too exhausted to wait, she went to bed. She had no alarm clock, and when she woke, sunlight was already pouring through the window. Panicked, she rushed to the kitchen, praying her father was still home. But the house was eerily empty. His bed was made, untouched. There was no coffee, no dirty dishes, no sign that he had ever come home. She scoffed at the thought of him having a girlfriend, but couldn't shake her growing concern. She checked the garage. His car was still there. Now she was really worried. Desperate for answers, she knocked on the door of the Crawfords, old neighbors who had always been kind to her. Mrs. Crawford greeted her warmly but with surprise, then told her the truth. Her father had been taken away by ambulance days ago and was still in the hospital. Carol's stomach dropped. She rushed back to the house to call the hospital, only to find the phone disconnected. Checking the garage again, she remembered how careless her father was with his keys. She found them still in the ignition and drove straight to the hospital. The news was grim. Her father had severe cirrhosis of the liver. He had only days to live. Hesitating at his hospital room door, she braced herself before walking in. She barely recognized him, thin, pale, and frail, but still aware enough to acknowledge her. He weakly told her he was dying, the years of drinking finally catching up to him. He instructed her to look for his lawyer's name in the address book at home. Everything he had, what little there was, he had left to her. Carol stayed until visiting hours ended, then returned to the only place that had ever felt like home. When she told Reed and Mary about her father's condition and that she would be staying in her old house, Mary quietly excused herself, sensing the need for privacy. Carol and Reed finalized the terms of the divorce. Since there were no children and the house remained in Mary's name, it was a straightforward process. She agreed to the financial arrangement Reed's lawyer proposed. Before she left, Reed had to ask, had she ever really loved him? Carol hesitated before admitting the truth. She had admired him, seen him as everything a good man should be. She had known he would treat her well and provide stability, but she wasn't sure she had ever truly loved him. She reflected on her upbringing, on her mother abandoning her, on her father's lifelong devotion to alcohol. She wasn't even sure she knew what love was. She acknowledged that Reed had only married her out of duty, not love. even if he hadn't realized it at the time. Tears welled in her eyes as she apologized for the pain she had caused him and Mary. Despite everything, the years they had spent together had been the happiest of her life. Reed didn't respond, but he silently helped her pack. Everything she owned fit into the back seat of her father's car. As she drove away, she looked back one last time, seeing Reed and Mary standing on the porch, watching her go. Tears streamed down her face as she drove. She cried the entire way home. The following day, Reed spent most of his time away from home. When he returned in the afternoon, he seemed unsettled. His mother noticed immediately and asked what was wrong. Reed admitted he had gone to Arnold Becker's house. He told Becker's wife everything. At first, she refused to believe him, but the more he spoke, the more convinced she became. By the time he left, Reed was almost certain another divorce was on the horizon. Still, it didn't feel like enough. So he went to Becker's workplace, asking around until someone pointed him out. When Reed confronted him, he bluntly introduced himself as Carol's husband and said he had just come from Becker's home, where he had destroyed his marriage, just as Becker had destroyed his. He suggested Becker's wife might be waiting for him that night, with a magnum. Becker turned pale, then lashed out, cursing and threatening Reed. When he raised his hand, Reed dodged and swiftly broke the man's nose. Becker collapsed in a heap. Reed spent 2 hours at the police station, but several witnesses confirmed he had acted in self-defense. No charges were filed. Mary half scolded, half admired his actions, but Reed simply shrugged. He was certain if she had been in his shoes, she would have done the same. Months passed. One evening, Reed returned home with unexpected news. He had 2 weeks of vacation left and planned to take his mother to Hawaii. Mary was overwhelmed with joy. Ever since reading Reed's letters about the island, she had longed to see it for herself, but never imagined she would get the chance. Upon arrival, Reed was struck by how much had changed. The island was modernized with tall buildings and wide paved streets. His first stop was Leilani's old house, but it was gone, replaced by office buildings. Disheartened, he and Mary attended a Sunday service at New Hope Church. During the service, Reed noticed the pastor had a pronounced limp, which made him wonder if he had been wounded in the war. Afterward, when Mary approached the pastor to thank him, Reed asked if he remembered a woman named Leilani. The pastor's eyes widened. He recognized Reed immediately. He recalled seeing him kiss Leilani in front of the church just before the bombing began, remembered how she had pleaded for him to stay and how Reed had insisted he had to return to his ship. Reed was stunned. The man who had once ushered people into the church for shelter that fateful morning was now standing before him. The pastor revealed that he himself had fought in the war and had been wounded during the D-Day invasion at Omaha Beach. Reed swallowed hard, offering his condolences, but the pastor simply smiled and said he wasn't surprised to hear that Reed had earned the Medal of Honor. Reed pressed for information about Leilani, but the news wasn't what he had hoped for. The pastor explained that after the war, the cost of living in Hawaii skyrocketed, forcing many families to leave, including Leilani's. Her father had fallen ill, and with rising expenses, they had moved to the mainland to live with a relative. Reed's heart sank. He finally learned Leilani's last name, Conti, but the pastor had no further details. He didn't know which state they had moved to. He simply said that Leilani had cried for weeks after Reed left, and that love like theirs was rare. He wished Reed luck in finding her. Reed tried. For years he searched, following lead after lead, but each one turned into a dead end. Eventually, he gave up. Mary watched with sadness as he resigned himself to a life alone, uninterested in finding love again. Then, in early 1961, an official letter from the Navy arrived. Reed, assuming he was too old to be drafted, joked with his mother about it. But when he opened it, he found an invitation to the 20th anniversary memorial service at Pearl Harbor. At first, he dismissed the idea, but Mary wanted to return to Hawaii. In the end, he agreed, taking time off for the trip. When they arrived, the reception was overwhelming. The Navy treated them with deep respect, and Reed discovered he was among 4 Medal of Honor recipients being honored that day. During the ceremony, Mary stood proudly among the families of the honorees, her heart swelling as Reed's name was announced. As the event continued, a woman approached Mary. She had long, silky black hair and carried a professional camera around her neck. She hesitated before speaking, apologizing for interrupting, but she had noticed how Mary lit up when Reed's name was mentioned and asked if they were related. Mary turned to her, taking one look before whispering, "Leilani." The woman was stunned. She had assumed Reed had married long ago and forgotten about her. Mary, however, had been waiting 2 decades for this moment. The two women talked throughout the ceremony, but Leilani had to finish taking photos. Before the event ended, she found Mary again. Reed, unaware, walked toward them. Calling out to his mother, he asked if she was okay after the long ceremony. Mary assured him she was fine, but had someone she wanted him to meet. Leilani turned around. The moment Reed saw her, his breath caught. His heart pounded. It was as if time had folded in on itself. Before he could speak, Leilani handed her camera to Mary and rushed into his arms, showering him with kisses. The crowd, sensing the moment's significance, erupted into applause. This was just the beginning. Leilani had built a life on the East Coast as a press photographer. She had married, but her husband had been unfaithful, leading to divorce. She had a teenage daughter who was in her second year of high school. Months of weekend visits, long phone calls, and heartfelt letters followed before Reed and Leilani finally married in June 1962. At the wedding, Leilani's daughter sat in the front row, hugging her new grandmother, watching as her mother and stepfather exchanged vows. Their love, despite 20 years of separation, had endured, and now it would last a lifetime.